Tonight, you'll discover a profound truth that Buddhist monks have carried in their hearts for over 2,000 years, that no one enters your life by accident. Every person you meet, every encounter you have, every relationship that touches your soul has been placed on your path for a reason. I'm going to share with you 10 extraordinary stories from ancient monasteries and mountain temples. Stories that reveal how every human connection serves our spiritual awakening. Each tale contains a sacred teaching that will help you understand the deeper purpose behind every person who has ever crossed your path. And here's what makes these stories so powerful. They don't just bring peace to your restless mind, they transform how you see every relationship in your life. Whether someone brought you joy or pain, challenged you or supported you, each encounter becomes a doorway to greater wisdom and compassion. These ancient teachings work even if you've struggled to find meaning in difficult relationships. Even if you've wondered why certain people came into your life only to leave. Even if you've felt hurt or confused by human connections. The great Zen master Dogen once taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to study others. To study others is to forget the self. In the next 3 hours, you'll discover exactly what this means as we explore how every person in your life, past, present, and future, serves as a teacher, a mirror, and a guide on your spiritual journey. So settle deeply into your bed now. Let your body become as still as a meditation cushion in an empty temple. Close your eyes gently, like lotus petals folding at sunset. Take one mindful breath with me now, breathing in acceptance, breathing out resistance. And as you exhale, know that you're about to receive teachings that have guided seekers for centuries. Teachings about the sacred purpose behind every soul you've ever encountered. Let's begin with our first story from the mountain monastery of Master Chen. High in the misty peaks of ancient China, there stood a monastery so remote that visitors came perhaps once in a season. The monks who lived there had dedicated their lives to understanding the deepest truths of existence, spending their days in meditation and their evenings sharing the wisdom they'd discovered. Master Chen, the eldest monk, had lived in these mountains for 40 years. His eyes held the clarity of mountain streams, and his presence brought immediate peace to anyone who encountered him. The younger monks often gathered around him after evening meditation, eager to learn from his vast understanding. One autumn day, as golden leaves drifted like prayers through the mountain air, an unexpected visitor arrived at the monastery gates. He was a wealthy merchant named Liu Wei, his fine silk robes now dusty from the long journey up the mountain path. His face wore the expression of someone carrying a heavy burden, not in his hands, but in his heart. The merchant had climbed these treacherous paths for one reason. 3 months earlier, his business partner of 20 years had betrayed him, stealing not just money, but destroying the trust that had been the foundation of their friendship. The betrayal had shattered Li Wei's faith in human nature. How could I have been so blind? He asked himself daily. How could someone I trusted like a brother do this to me? When Master Chen welcomed the merchant into the monastery's simple receiving hall, Liu Wei immediately poured out his story. His words came like a rushing river, filled with anger, confusion, and deep hurt. "Master," he said, his voice breaking, "I came here because I cannot understand why this happened. This man was like family to me. We built our business together, shared meals with each other's children, celebrated each other's successes. And then, this betrayal. It makes no sense. Why do people enter our lives only to cause such pain?" Master Chen listened with the infinite patience that only comes from decades of meditation practice. When Liu Wei finished speaking, the elderly monk was quiet for a long moment, his eyes gazing through the window at the mountains beyond. "Tell me," Master Chen finally said, his voice as gentle as morning mist, "before this betrayal, what kind of man were you in business?" Liu Wei looked surprised by the question. I was successful. Honest, I thought. I trusted easily, perhaps too easily, and now. The merchant considered this. Now I question everything. I look more carefully at people's motivations. I listen not just to their words, but watch their actions. I've learned to protect myself. Master Chen nodded slowly. And in your personal relationships, how has this experience changed you there? Liu Wei paused, realization beginning to dawn. I appreciate my true friends more deeply now. I value my family in ways I never did before. I no longer take loyalty for granted. "Ah," said Master Chen, a gentle smile appearing on his weathered face. "And tell me, before this happened, did you ever think deeply about trust? About the nature of human relationships? About what it means to truly know another person?" "No," Liu Wei admitted. "I simply trusted without thought." Master Chen rose and walked to the window, gesturing for the merchant to join him. Outside, the mountain landscape stretched endlessly, peak after peak disappearing into the distance. "Look at these mountains," the master said. "Do you see how each peak is shaped by the valleys between them? The high places exist because of the low places. The beauty comes from both together." He turned to face Liu Wei directly. "Your business partner did not enter your life by chance, my friend. He came as your teacher, though neither of you knew it at the time. For 20 years, he taught you the joy of partnership and trust. Then, in his final lesson, he taught you wisdom, discernment, and the preciousness of true loyalty." Liu Wei felt his breath catch in his throat. "But the pain he caused, ... Double quote, "Yes," Master Chen acknowledged. "Pain is often how our greatest teachers get our attention. But tell me honestly, are you a wiser man today than you were before this experience?" The merchant was silent for a long time, looking out at the endless mountains. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I am wiser. More careful, but also more grateful for the people who have proven themselves trustworthy. Then your teacher succeeded," Master Chen said simply. "He played his role perfectly, though he likely never understood it himself. In Buddhism, we understand that every person who enters our life serves our awakening in some way. Some teach us through kindness, others through challenge. Some stay for a lifetime, others for just a moment. But each interaction shapes us into who we're meant to become." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Liu Wei felt something shift inside his chest. The tight knot of anger that had lived there for months began to loosen. In its place, he felt something unexpected, a strange kind of gratitude. So even those who hurt us, especially those who hurt us, Master Chen confirmed, they often teach us the most important lessons about our own strength, about the value of what we truly cherish, about the difference between superficial connections and deep bonds. Your partner's betrayal was not random cruelty. It was the completion of his teaching. He gave you the gift of wisdom, though it came wrapped in pain. That night, Liu Wei slept in the monastery guest quarters, and for the first time in months, his dreams were peaceful. He dreamed of mountain peaks and valleys, of teachers in many forms, and of the invisible threads that connect all beings in ways we rarely understand. When he descended the mountain the next morning, Liu Wei carried with him a new understanding. Every person he would meet from that day forward, he would greet as a teacher. Some would teach through kindness, others through challenge. Some would stay, others would leave. But each would serve his growth, his understanding, and his journey toward wisdom. The betrayal that had once seemed like his greatest misfortune had become the doorway to his greatest insight. No one enters our life by chance, and every encounter, joyful or painful, serves our awakening. As you rest now in your bed, feel the truth of this teaching settling into your heart like mountain mist settling in a valley. Think of the people in your life who have challenged you, who have caused you pain or confusion. Can you begin to see them not as enemies, but as teachers? Can you feel gratitude for the wisdom they brought you, even if it came wrapped in difficulty? Let this understanding bring peace to your restless thoughts about past relationships. Let it help you forgive those who seemed to cause you harm. And let it fill you with wonder at the perfect design behind every human encounter. Rest now, knowing that every person who has ever touched your life has been exactly who you needed them to be, teaching exactly what you needed to learn, arriving exactly when you needed their lesson most. In a small monastery nestled beside a flowing river, young monk Tenzo had been studying Buddhist teachings for just over a year. At 19, he still struggled with many aspects of monastic life, but none more than the teaching about compassion for all beings. He understood it intellectually, but in his heart, he still felt resistance toward people who seemed deliberately cruel or unkind. Every morning, Tenzo would walk the 2 miles to the nearby village to collect alms, simple offerings of rice, vegetables, or coins that the villagers would give to support the monastery. Most villagers were kind, offering their gifts with bowed heads and gentle smiles. But there was one man who made these daily journeys a source of dread. His name was Koji, a blacksmith whose workshop stood at the village center. Koji seemed to take pleasure in tormenting the young monk. As Tenzo would pass by with his alms bowl, Koji would shout insults. "Look at this lazy boy. Too worthless to do real work, so he begs from hard-working people. Or why should we feed someone who contributes nothing to society?" Day after day, month after month, Tenzo endured these verbal attacks. The words stung deeply, filling him with anger and shame. He began taking longer routes to avoid the blacksmith's workshop, but the village was small, and Koji always seemed to find him. One evening, after a particularly harsh encounter where Koji had thrown dirty water near Tenzo's feet while laughing, the young monk returned to the monastery in tears. He sought out his teacher, Master Dato, whom he found tending the monastery garden as twilight settled over the mountains. Master Tenzo said, his voice shaking with emotion, "I cannot understand why Koji has entered my life. Every day he fills me with anger and shame. I try to practice compassion, but this man makes it impossible. Surely not every person serves a purpose. Surely some people are just ... cruel." Master Dato continued pulling weeds in silence for several minutes, his movements slow and deliberate. Finally, he stood and brushed the earth from his hands. "Tell me, Tenzo, what do you feel when you encounter kind villagers?" "Gratitude," Tenzo replied immediately. "Peace, joy. And when you return to the monastery after these pleasant encounters, how do you spend your evening?" Tenzo thought about this. I read or chat with other monks, or sometimes I just enjoy the quiet I see. And after your encounters with Koji, I come straight to you, or to meditation, or I spend hours examining my anger, trying to understand it, trying to transform it. Master Dato nodded slowly. So the kind villagers inspire you to maintain your current level of practice, while Koji drives you to deepen it. The young monk felt a flutter of understanding, but shook his head. But surely there must be gentler ways to learn. For some people, yes, Master Dato agreed. But tell me honestly, before Koji, how much time did you spend truly examining your anger? How deeply did you investigate your reactions to criticism or shame? Barely at all, Tenzo admitted. And now? Now I think about these things constantly. I'm forced to look at parts of myself I'd rather ignore. Master Dato smiled. Koji is your most demanding teacher, isn't he? The kind villagers teach you that practicing compassion is pleasant and easy. Koji teaches you that practicing compassion is possible even when it's difficult and painful. Which lesson do you think will serve you better in life? That night, Tenzo lay in his simple bed, unable to sleep. He thought about all the great Buddhist masters he'd studied, and realized that their compassion was remarkable not because they were kind to kind people, but because they remained loving even toward those who treated them cruelly. The next morning, as he prepared for his alms walk, Tenzo made a decision. Instead of dreading his encounter with Koji, he would try to see the blacksmith as his teacher, perhaps his most important teacher. As he approached the workshop, he could hear the familiar sound of hammer on anvil. Koji looked up as Tenzo passed, and as usual began his verbal assault. Here comes the beggar monk again. Tell me, boy, what useful thing have you done today? But instead of hurrying past with downcast eyes, Tenzo stopped and bowed respectfully. Good morning, Master Koji. Thank you for your question. Today, I hope to practice patience and compassion, and thanks to you, I have the perfect opportunity. Koji was so surprised he nearly dropped his hammer. What did you say? I said thank you, Tenzo repeated calmly. You teach me something every day. The other villagers teach me how easy it is to be kind when others are kind to me. You teach me how to be kind when it's difficult. Both lessons are valuable, but yours might be more important. For the first time since Tenzo had known him, Koji was speechless. The young monk continued on his way, feeling something new in his chest. Not the familiar anger and shame, but a genuine sense of gratitude. Over the following weeks, something remarkable began to happen. Koji's insults became less frequent, then less harsh, then stopped altogether. Instead, the blacksmith would simply watch as Tenzo passed, a puzzled expression on his weathered face. One morning, as Tenzo was returning to the monastery, Koji called out to him, "Monk boy." Wait. Tenzo stopped and turned, expecting perhaps one final verbal assault. Instead, Koji walked up to him carrying a small wrapped bundle. My wife made extra rice cakes this morning, Koji said gruffly, not meeting Tenzo's eyes. I thought the monastery might want them. Tenzo accepted the offering with deep gratitude, bowing low. As he walked away, he heard Koji call after him, "That thing you said about me being your teacher. Did you mean that?" "Yes, Master Koji," Tenzo replied sincerely. "You taught me that real compassion isn't a feeling. It's a choice we make, regardless of how we feel. That's one of the most valuable teachings I've ever received." For the first time in their many encounters, Koji smiled. Years later, when Tenzo had become a respected teacher himself, he would often tell his students about his greatest instructor, not Master Dato with his gentle wisdom, but Koji the blacksmith, who had forced him to discover compassion in the most unlikely circumstances. The people who challenge us, Tenzo would teach, are not obstacles to our spiritual growth. They are the very mechanism of our growth. They show us where we still have work to do, where our practice needs to deepen, where our understanding needs to expand. Without them, we might mistake politeness for true compassion, comfort for real peace. Koji had entered Tenzo's life not to make him miserable, but to make him strong. Not to teach him that people could be cruel, but to teach him that he could be compassionate regardless of cruelty. The blacksmith's harsh words had been perfectly designed to forge in the young monk's heart a compassion that no gentle treatment could have created. As you rest now, think of the people in your life who have been your Kojis, those who have challenged you, criticized you, or seemed to make your path more difficult. Can you begin to see them as your most demanding teachers? Can you feel gratitude for the strength and wisdom their challenges have forged within you? Let this understanding soften your heart toward those who have been difficult in your life. They didn't enter your path to harm you, but to help you discover capacities for patience, strength, and compassion you never knew you possessed. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that even your most challenging relationships have served your highest good, teaching you to find love in the most unlikely places, to maintain peace in the midst of storms, and to discover who you truly are when tested by life's difficulties. In the renowned monastery of Siruji, perched on the slopes of Mount Furano, there lived an abbot known throughout Japan for his wisdom and compassion. Master Chen had guided seekers for over 30 years, and it was said that no one left his presence unchanged. Pilgrims would travel for months to seek his counsel, and his teachings were studied in monasteries across the land. One winter evening, as snow fell quietly outside the monastery walls, a young woman arrived at the gates. Her name was Yuki, and she came not as a typical seeker, but as someone carrying a darkness so profound it seemed to follow her like a shadow. Yuki had once been a promising artist, known in Kyoto for her exquisite paintings of nature scenes. Her works captured not just the appearance of flowers and landscapes, but somehow seemed to convey their very essence. People would stand before her paintings and feel they could smell the cherry blossoms or hear the babbling streams. But 2 years earlier, a fire had destroyed her studio, taking with it not only her life's work, but also her young daughter, who had been visiting that day. The tragedy had shattered something fundamental in Yuki's spirit. She had stopped painting, stopped speaking to friends, stopped believing in any kind of benevolent universe. For months, she had wandered from temple to temple, seeking someone who could explain why such meaningless tragedy existed. Every teacher she met offered the same responses. Everything happens for a reason, or this was your karma, or your daughter's. Death served a greater purpose. These answers only deepened her rage and despair. If everything happens for a reason, she would respond bitterly, then your God is cruel. If there's a purpose to a child's death, then purpose itself is meaningless. Most teachers would grow uncomfortable with her anger and send her away. Some suggested she needed more faith. Others recommended longer periods of meditation to calm her disturbed mind. None could sit with her darkness without trying to fix it or explain it away. When Yuki finally reached Master Chen's monastery, she was at the end of her spiritual journey. This would be her last attempt to find meaning. If this renowned teacher also failed to provide satisfactory answers, she had decided she would end her own life. Master Chen received her in his simple room, where a single candle flickered against the darkness. When Yuki began to tell her story about the fire, about her daughter, about her lost faith, she spoke with the flat tone of someone who had told this tale too many times. But something unexpected happened. Instead of offering explanations or advice, Master Chen simply listened. When she finished speaking, he remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I have no answers for you." Yuki looked up, startled. "What?" I said. "I have no answers. I cannot explain why your daughter died. I cannot tell you it happened for a reason, because I don't know if it did. I cannot promise that your pain serves some greater purpose, because such promises would be cruel lies." For the first time in 2 years, Yuki felt something other than anger. She felt ... surprise. "But you're supposed to be wise. You're supposed to have answers." Master Chen shook his head. "Wisdom isn't having answers, my dear. Wisdom is being comfortable with not having them. Your previous teachers failed you, not because they lacked knowledge, but because they couldn't bear to sit with mystery, with unknowing, with the terrible truth that sometimes life makes no sense at all." Tears began to flow down. Yuki's face, the first tears she had shed since the fire. "Then what's the point? What's the point of anything?" "I don't know," Master Chen said gently. "But you're here, asking that question. Even in your despair, even in your certainty that life is meaningless, something in you keeps seeking. What do you make of that?" Yuki considered this. I don't know either." "Good," the abbot said. "Now we're both in the same place, the place of not knowing. And perhaps that's exactly where we need to be." Over the following days, something unprecedented happened at Tsurugi Monastery. Instead of being given teachings about acceptance or the nature of suffering, Yuki was invited to simply be present with her pain. Master Chen would sit with her for hours, not trying to transform her anger or heal her grief, but simply witnessing it. "Your previous teachers," he explained one evening, "tried to help you by explaining your pain away. But pain that comes from love, the pain of losing someone precious, that pain is sacred. It honors the depth of your connection. To try to heal it quickly or explain it away is to dishonor your love." For the first time, Yuki felt that someone understood. Her pain wasn't a problem to be solved, but a testament to how deeply she had loved her daughter. "But I can't paint anymore," she whispered. "I can't create anything beautiful. How can I create when I know it can all be destroyed in an instant?" "Can't you?" Master Chen asked. "Or is it that you're afraid to risk loving something enough to create it?" This question haunted Yuki for days. She began to realize that her inability to create wasn't just about grief, it was about fear. Fear of caring about something enough to lose it again. One morning, while walking in the monastery garden, Yuki noticed how the winter trees stood bare against the sky. They had lost their leaves, their beauty, their apparent purpose. Yet there was something profound about their stark honesty, their willingness to stand exposed and seemingly empty. Without thinking, she picked up a stick and began drawing in the snow. Simple lines at first, the curve of a branch, the angle of a trunk. But as she drew, something awakened in her that had been sleeping for 2 years. Master Chen found her there hours later, surrounded by drawings in the snow. Pictures of bare trees, of winter landscapes, of beauty that acknowledged loss rather than denying it. "Ah," he said quietly. "You've remembered." "Remembered what?" "That creation and destruction are partners, not enemies. That beauty becomes more precious, not less, when we know it won't last forever. Your daughter's death didn't end your ability to create, it deepened it. Now when you paint a flower, you paint it knowing that flowers die. That doesn't make the flower less beautiful. It makes it more beautiful, because its beauty is touched with the poignancy of impermanence. Yuki looked at her snow drawings, already beginning to fade as the wind stirred them. But these won't last either. Nothing lasts, Master Chen agreed. But the act of creating them, the love that moved through you as you made them, that's eternal. That's what your daughter gave you, and what you give to the world through your art, not permanence, but the eternal moment of creative love. That night, for the first time since the fire, Yuki slept peacefully. She dreamed of her daughter, but instead of the usual nightmares, she dreamed of teaching her child to paint, of passing on the gift of seeing beauty even in impermanence. When spring came, Yuki left the monastery, but she didn't leave broken as she had arrived. She left transformed, not because her pain had been healed, but because she had learned to see it as sacred. Her subsequent paintings, when she finally returned to her art, were unlike anything she had created before. They captured not just beauty, but the preciousness that comes from knowing beauty won't last forever. Years later, Yuki would understand that Master Chen had entered her life at exactly the right moment, not to give her false comfort or easy answers, but to teach her that wisdom begins with admitting we don't know everything, and that creation becomes more meaningful, not less, when we acknowledge destruction. The abbot had shown her that some people enter our lives not to provide answers, but to sit with us in our questions, not to heal our pain, but to help us find the sacred within our suffering, not to restore our old selves, but to help birth new selves that can hold more complexity, more mystery, more truth. Master Chen had been exactly the teacher Yuki needed, someone wise enough to admit he didn't have all the answers, compassionate enough to honor her pain rather than rush to heal it, and patient enough to wait for her to rediscover her own creative spirit in her own time. As you rest now, think of the people who have been with you in your darkest moments, not the ones who tried to cheer you up or fix you, but the ones who are willing to sit with you in your pain, your confusion, your questions without easy answers. These people entered your life to teach you that you don't have to understand everything to move forward, and that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from having answers, but from having someone witness your journey without judgment. Let this understanding bring peace to your restless mind. Sleep now, knowing that even in your moments of deepest confusion or pain, you have been held by the perfect unfolding of relationships designed to teach you exactly what you needed to learn about resilience, authenticity, and the sacred nature of the human experience. High in the remote mountains of Tibet, where the air grows thin and the world falls away into silence, there lived a monk who had chosen the path of absolute solitude. For 15 years, Lobsang had lived in a simple cave, emerging only to gather wild plants and collect water from a mountain stream. He had come to these heights seeking perfect peace, perfect stillness, perfect communion with the eternal. Lobsang's daily routine was as predictable as sunrise. He would wake before dawn for meditation, spend his morning in contemplative study of sacred texts, gather simple food in the afternoon, and spend his evenings in deep prayer. He had achieved what he believed was the ultimate spiritual life, complete freedom from the complications and distractions of human relationships. The other monks in the valley monastery far below had long since stopped trying to convince him to return. They respected his choice, and occasionally a young monk would make the difficult climb to bring him supplies, always leaving the offerings at a respectful distance from his cave without attempting conversation. Lobsang took pride in his complete detachment from worldly concerns. When thoughts of his family arose, he dismissed them as distractions. When memories of friendships surfaced, He viewed them as obstacles to enlightenment. He had successfully eliminated what he saw as the greatest barrier to spiritual realization: other people. Then, one autumn morning, his perfect solitude was shattered. As Lobsang emerged from his cave for his morning ablutions, he found a young woman sitting on a rock near his water source. She appeared to be in her 20s, with the weathered hands and strong build of someone accustomed to mountain life. More surprisingly, she seemed completely at ease, as if sitting near a hermit's cave was the most natural thing in the world. "Good morning, uncle," she said cheerfully, using the respectful term for an older monk. "My name is Pema. I've come to visit." Lobsang was so startled he nearly dropped his water bowl. In 15 years, no one had dared to approach his cave directly, much less speak to him uninvited. Double quotes. He stammered, then gathered his composure. "I'm sorry, but I have taken vows of solitude. I do not receive visitors. There is a monastery in the valley if you seek teachings." Pema smiled. "Oh, I don't seek teachings, uncle, I've come to give them." This was so unexpected that Lobsang found himself curious despite his shock. "You, what?" "I've come to teach you something important," Pema said matter-of-factly. "But don't worry, I won't interfere with your routine. I'll just sit here each day for a while. You can pretend I'm not here if you like." With that, she settled more comfortably on her rock and pulled out some knitting, humming softly to herself as if she were in her own garden rather than disturbing a hermit's retreat. Lobsang stood frozen for several minutes, torn between outrage and bewilderment. Finally, he filled his water bowl and hurried back to his cave, hoping she would be gone when he emerged again. She wasn't. Day after day, Pema appeared at the water source. She never tried to engage Lobsang in conversation beyond cheerful greetings, never asked him questions or sought his attention. She simply sat on her rock, knitting or reading or sometimes just watching the mountain landscape with evident contentment. At first, Lobsang's meditation was completely disrupted. How could he achieve inner peace with another person so close by? Her very presence felt like an invasion, a violation of the sacred space he had created. He found himself listening for her footsteps, wondering when she would arrive, distracted by the knowledge that she was there. After a week of this, his annoyance turned to anger. Who was this person to disturb his spiritual practice? Didn't she understand that he had chosen solitude for a reason? He decided to confront her. "Young woman," he said sternly as he approached the water source, "you must understand that your presence here is disruptive to my practice. I have spent 15 years cultivating peace and detachment. Your continued presence undoes years of spiritual work." Pema looked up from her knitting with genuine interest. "Oh, how fascinating. So your peace depends on controlling your environment, and your detachment requires the absence of other people. That's very educational, uncle." Lobsang felt heat rise in his cheeks. Of course, peace requires the right conditions. That's why serious practitioners seek solitude. Pema mused, returning to her knitting. "I've always wondered about that. In the valley, there's an old grandmother who has raised 12 children and 26 grandchildren. Her house is never quiet, never empty. Yet when you meet her, she radiates the most profound peace I've ever encountered. I used to think that was strange, but now I'm beginning to understand." "Understand what?" Lobsang demanded, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Well, if peace can only exist in perfect conditions, then it's quite fragile, isn't it? But if peace can exist even in chaos, then is truly strong. I'm beginning to think that real detachment isn't about being separate from others, but about being with others without losing yourself. That evening, Lobsang's meditation was more disturbed than ever. Not by Pima's presence, she had left as usual in the afternoon, but by her words. Was his spiritual practice making him stronger or weaker? Was his detachment real if it required the absence of all challenges? Over the following days, he began to observe Pema more carefully. Despite her apparent disregard for his desire for solitude, there was something about her presence that was ... peaceful. She never seemed anxious or demanding. She didn't appear to want anything from him. She simply was. One morning, as autumn frost painted the rocks silver, Lobsang found himself actually looking forward to seeing her. When she didn't appear at her usual time, he felt a strange disappointment. When she finally arrived, looking tired and moving slowly, he surprised himself by asking, "Are you well?" Pema smiled, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "My grandmother is dying," she said simply. "I've been sitting with her through the nights, but I wanted to continue our teaching sessions." "Teaching sessions?" Lobsang asked. "But you haven't taught me anything, haven't I?" Pema said gently. "In these weeks since I've been coming here, what have you learned about your own practice?" Lobsang considered this seriously. "I've learned that my peace was more fragile than I thought. I've learned that my detachment was perhaps more like avoidance. I've learned that true equanimity might be something different than what I was cultivating, and..." He was quiet for a long moment. "And I've learned that there's something healing about simply sharing space with another being, even without conversation. Your presence, which I initially saw as a disturbance, has become ... companionable." Pema nodded. "My grandmother sent me to you, uncle. She said that sometimes the most dedicated seekers can become trapped in their own seeking. She said you needed to learn that enlightenment isn't about escaping from relationship, but about finding freedom within relationship. Your grandmother knows about me. She knows about everyone in these mountains," Pema said. "She says the mountain itself told her there was a monk up here who had mistaken isolation for liberation. She thought maybe I could help you understand the difference." That afternoon, Pema didn't return to her usual spot. Lobsang waited by the water source longer than usual, then realized she had gone to be with her dying grandmother. For the first time in 15 years, he felt loneliness, not as something to overcome, but as information about his heart's capacity for connection. 3 days later, Pema returned, dressed in the white clothing of mourning. "She died peacefully," she said. "Her last words were about you. She said to tell you that true solitude isn't about being alone. It's about being complete within yourself, whether you're alone or with others." Lobsang felt tears on his cheeks. The first tears he had allowed himself in years. "I never met your grandmother. Yet she sent you to teach me something I couldn't learn in 15 years of solitude. She said that the mountain brings together exactly the right people at exactly the right time." Pema replied. "I was supposed to learn from you too, uncle. Watching your dedication to practice, your discipline, your sincere seeking, it taught me about the value of contemplative depth. And you taught me that wisdom traditions are meant to be lived, not just studied." Over the following months, Pema continued to visit, but now their encounters included conversation, shared meals, and eventually, Lobsang found himself making the journey down to the valley to visit the monastery and the village where Pema's grandmother had lived. He discovered that his years of solitary practice had indeed been valuable. They had taught him to find his center, to cultivate concentration, to touch states of profound peace. But Pema had taught him that these inner attainments were meant to be tested and refined in relationship with others. Years later, Lobsang became known as a teacher who uniquely understood both the value of solitary practice and the importance of compassionate engagement with the world. He would tell his students that Pema had been sent to him not to disturb his spiritual practice, but to complete it. I thought enlightenment meant transcending the need for human connection, he would teach. But Pema showed me that true enlightenment means being so complete within yourself that you can connect with others without losing your center. So peaceful that you don't need to control your environment. So detached that you can love without clinging. Pema had entered his life to teach him that the highest spiritual realization isn't about escaping from the world of relationships, but about bringing the fruits of spiritual practice into every human encounter. She had shown him that compassion cultivated in isolation is theoretical, but compassion tested in relationship becomes wisdom. The persistent visitor who had seemed to threaten his spiritual progress had actually been the key to its fulfillment. Without her gentle challenge to his ideas about practice, he might have spent the rest of his life mistaking spiritual bypassing for spiritual attainment. As you rest now in the quiet of your own space, consider the people who have challenged your comfortable patterns, who have refused to let you retreat completely from connection, who have persistently offered relationship even when you thought you wanted solitude. These people entered your life to teach you that true peace isn't dependent on perfect conditions, and that wisdom grows not in isolation from others, but in learning how to remain centered while engaging authentically with the world. Let this understanding settle into your heart like mountain mist settling into valleys. Sleep peacefully, knowing that even those who have disturbed your comfort have served your growth, teaching you the difference between avoiding challenges and transcending them, between hiding from a relationship and finding freedom within it. In the ancient city of Nara, where cherry blossoms painted the streets pink each spring, there lived a tea master whose ceremonies were considered the most refined in all of Japan. Master Sato had studied the way of tea for over 40 years, and his movements possessed a grace that seemed to embody the very essence of mindfulness and precision. Students traveled from across the empire to study with him, but Master Sato accepted very few. His standards were exacting, and he believed that the sacred art of tea ceremony could only be transmitted to those who demonstrated exceptional natural ability and deep respect for tradition. His tea house, nestled in a carefully tended garden, was a sanctuary of perfection. Every stone was placed with intention, every flower arranged with profound consideration. The ceremony rooms were spotless, the tea utensils priceless antiques passed down through generations. Even the silence in his space seemed refined. Master Sato took great pride in the caliber of his students. They were typically young people from noble families, quick to learn and naturally graceful. Their ceremonies became meditations in motion, each gesture flowing seamlessly into the next, each movement expressing years of disciplined training. Then, one spring morning, everything changed. A young man named Kenji appeared at the tea house gates, asking to be accepted as a student. There was nothing about his appearance that suggested he belonged in Master Sato's refined world. His clothes were simple, his hands rough from manual labor, his manner earnest but unpolished. "I work in the rice fields," Kenji explained, "but I've heard about the way of tea and something calls to me about it. I know I'm not like your other students, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone to learn." Master Sato's initial instinct was to politely decline. This young farmer clearly lacked the refinement necessary for such a subtle art, but something in Kenji's eyes, A quality of sincere longing made the master hesitate. "Very well," he said finally. "You may observe for 1 month. If you show aptitude, we will discuss formal study." From the very first lesson, it was clear that Kenji was different from the other students. Where they moved with inherited grace, he fumbled. Where they intuited the subtle rhythms of the ceremony, he struggled to remember the basic steps. His hands, strong from fieldwork, seemed too large for the delicate tea utensils. During his first week, Kenji broke a tea bowl, not a priceless antique. Fortunately, but still a vessel that Master Sato had used for years. The master watched in horror as the ceramic shattered on the tatami mat, his perfect ceremony disrupted by this clumsy intrusion. "I'm so sorry, Master," Kenji said, his face flushed with shame. "I'll replace it somehow." Master Sato dismissed him for the day, irritated by the disruption to his carefully orchestrated class. That evening, he seriously considered ending Kenji's trial period early. Clearly, this young man lacked the fundamental qualities necessary for tea ceremony. But something stopped him from making that decision. Perhaps it was the memory of Kenji's genuine remorse, or the way he had carefully gathered every shard of the broken bowl, as if each piece were precious. The following day, Kenji returned with a small wrapped bundle. "Master," he said, bowing deeply, "I cannot replace the bowl I broke, but I brought something I hope you might accept." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal a simple tea bowl, clearly handmade and imperfect. The glaze was uneven, the shape slightly asymmetrical, the craftsmanship obviously amateur. "I made this myself," Kenji explained. "I know it's not beautiful like your other bowls, but I worked on it all night. I wanted to understand what it means to create something for tea ceremony, not just use what others have made." Master Sato examined the crude bowl, noting its many flaws, yet something about it touched him. There was something honest about its imperfections, something genuine about the effort it represented. "We will use this in today's ceremony," he announced, surprising his other students. As the lesson progressed, Master Sato found himself watching Kenji differently. Yes, the young man was clumsy, but his attention was absolute. While other students went through the motions with practiced ease, Kenji was fully present to every moment, every gesture, every breath. When it came time for Kenji to perform the ceremony using his own humble bowl, something extraordinary happened. His movements were still awkward, his technique still imperfect, but there was something in his manner that the other students, for all their grace, had never achieved. There was reverence, not just for the tradition or the teacher, but for the very act of serving tea, of creating a moment of connection and peace. As Master Sato watched Kenji carefully warm the rough little bowl, measure the tea with intense concentration, and whisk the matcha with such focused attention that sweat appeared on his brow, the master felt something shift in his understanding. His other students performed beautiful ceremonies, but they had become so focused on perfection that they had forgotten wonder. They executed the forms flawlessly, but without the sense of gratitude and amazement that should infuse every gesture. Kenji, in his clumsy sincerity, reminded Master Sato why he had originally been drawn to tea ceremony himself, not for the aesthetic perfection, but for the profound mindfulness it required, the way it transformed ordinary actions into sacred moments. Over the following weeks, Master Sato began to notice how Kenji's presence affected the entire class. His questions, born from genuine curiosity rather than academic interest, forced everyone to examine aspects of tea ceremony they had taken for granted. "Master," Kenji asked one day, "why do we bow to the tea utensils?" The other students smirked at such a basic question, but Master Sato found himself giving a deeper answer than he had in years. We bow to acknowledge that even inanimate objects possess Buddha nature, that everything we use in ceremony is sacred and deserving of respect, said Kenji, his eyes lighting up with understanding. Like the rice plants I tend, each one is just doing what it was meant to do, but there's something sacred in that, isn't there? This simple observation sparked a discussion that lasted the entire session, with even the advanced students discovering new depths in practices they had performed hundreds of times. As the months passed, Kenji's technique gradually improved, though he never achieved the effortless grace of the other students. But his presence brought something to the tea house that had been missing, a sense of beginner's mind, of approaching each ceremony as if encountering it for the first time. One day, Master Sato realized that he looked forward to Kenji's inevitable mistakes, because they always led to moments of deeper understanding. When Kenji accidentally used too much tea powder, it sparked a conversation about abundance and restraint. When he forgot part of the prescribed sequence, it led to an exploration of the relationship between form and spontaneity. The master began to understand that Kenji had not entered his life to learn tea ceremony, or rather, not only to learn it. Kenji had come to teach Master Sato that perfection without heart is merely performance. That technique without reverence is empty accomplishment. Years later, when Master Sato had become known not just for the precision of his ceremonies, but for the profound spirit he brought to his teaching, he would credit Kenji with transforming his understanding of what mastery truly meant. "My other students taught me that skill can be developed through practice," he would say. "But Kenji taught me that mastery is not about eliminating mistakes. It's about bringing such complete presence to whatever arises that even our errors become doorways to deeper wisdom." Kenji had entered Master Sato's refined world not to disrupt it, but to complete it. His clumsy hands had handled the tea utensils with more genuine reverence than the most skilled practitioners. His amateur bowl had contained more authentic tea spirit than the most precious antiques. The student who seemed least qualified had been exactly the teacher the master needed. Someone to remind him that the way of tea was never about achieving perfection, but about cultivating a heart capable of finding the sacred in the imperfect, the ordinary, the utterly human. As you rest now, think of the people who have entered your life not with polished skills or impressive credentials, but with sincere hearts and genuine effort. Consider those who have reminded you, through their very imperfections, what really matters in your work, your relationships, your spiritual seeking. These people came not to achieve your standards, but to help you remember that the most profound teachings often come wrapped in humble packages, and that mastery is less about perfection than about bringing complete presence and authentic care to whatever we do. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that everyone who has crossed your path, skilled or clumsy, polished or rough, sophisticated or simple, has contributed something essential to your understanding of what it means to live with an open and grateful heart. In the mountains of northern Tibet, there stood a monastery famous not for its scholarly teachings or elaborate ceremonies, but for something far more humble: the extraordinary meals prepared by its cook. Tenzin had been preparing food for the monks for over 20 years, and it was said that no one left his kitchen unsatisfied, either in body or spirit. Tenzin approached cooking as a spiritual practice. He would wake each morning before dawn, not to meditate in the traditional sense, but to prepare food with such mindfulness and care that the very act became a form of prayer. Every vegetable was cleaned with attention, every grain of rice blessed before cooking, every meal prepared as if he were feeding the Buddha himself. The other monks often marveled at how Tenzin could take the simplest ingredients, barley, vegetables, yak butter, salt, and transform them into meals that seemed to nourish not just their bodies, but their souls. There was something about eating food prepared with such devotion that made even the most basic fare taste extraordinary. Tenzin took deep satisfaction in his role. He had found his calling in service, in the quiet practice of feeding others. His kitchen was his temple, his ladle and cutting knife his prayer tools. He needed nothing more than the gratitude in the monks' eyes when they gathered for meals, the way their faces lit up when they tasted his simple but perfectly prepared dishes. Then, one harsh winter day, this peaceful routine was shattered. During the worst blizzard anyone could remember, a stranger appeared at the monastery gates. He was a thin, ragged man whose eyes held a desperate hunger that went far beyond physical need. The monks brought him inside, gave him warm clothes, and directed him to the dining hall where Tenzin was serving the evening meal. The stranger, who gave his name as Norbu, ate with a voraciousness that was unsettling to watch. He consumed bowl after bowl of sampa and vegetables, eating so quickly he barely seemed to taste the food. When he finished, he immediately asked for more. Tenzin gladly served him additional portions, happy to feed someone so obviously in need. But something strange happened. No matter how much Norbu ate, he never seemed satisfied. His eyes remained hungry, desperate, even after consuming enough food for 3 men. More, he would demand as soon as he emptied each bowl. "I need more." At first, Tenzin assumed the man was simply recovering from starvation. But days passed, then weeks, and Norbu's hunger never diminished. He would appear in the kitchen at all hours, begging for food. When meals were served, he would eat until other monks had to intervene, concerned he might make himself ill. Most disturbing was the way Norbu ate. There was no enjoyment in it, no satisfaction, no gratitude. He consumed Tenzin's carefully prepared meals like someone trying to fill a hole that could never be filled. The food seemed to disappear into him without providing any real nourishment. The other monks began to complain. Norbu was disrupting their peaceful mealtimes, consuming more than his fair share, creating an atmosphere of urgency and greed around food that had never existed before. Perhaps he should move on, some suggested. He's been here for weeks. Surely he's recovered enough to continue his journey. But Tenzin found himself strangely reluctant to send Norbu away. There was something about the man's desperate hunger that called to his compassion, even as it challenged his understanding of how food should be received and appreciated. One evening, after Norbu had once again consumed enormous quantities of food without apparent satisfaction, Tenzin approached him as he sat alone in the dining hall. "My friend," the cook said gently, "I've been watching you eat for weeks, and I see that you're never satisfied. Can you tell me what you're truly hungry for?" Norbu looked up with wild eyes. "Food. I need more food. I'm starving. But you've eaten more in the past hour than most people eat in a day," Tenzin observed. "Yet you still feel starving. This suggests to me that your hunger is not really about food." For the first time since his arrival, Norbu stopped eating and really looked at the cook. "What do you mean?" Tenzin sat down across from him. "In the teachings, we learn about hungry ghosts, beings whose appetites can never be satisfied because they're trying to fill spiritual emptiness with material things. Tell me, what were you doing before you came here?" Norbu's face crumpled. "I was a merchant," he whispered. "A successful merchant? I had everything: wealth, status, a beautiful house, respect in my community. But my wife died, and then my children were grown and scattered, and suddenly all my success felt ... empty. I kept working harder, making more money, acquiring more possessions, thinking that would fill the emptiness. But nothing worked, and then I lost everything in bad investments. My house, my business, my status, all gone. I've been wandering for months, telling myself I was looking for work, but really I was looking for ... something, anything to make me feel alive again, to fill this terrible emptiness inside. Tenzo nodded with deep understanding. And now you're trying to fill that spiritual emptiness with food. I don't know, Nobu cried. I just know I'm hungry all the time, but no matter how much I eat, the hunger never goes away. That night, Tenzin lay awake, thinking about Nobu's words. He realized that the desperate man had been sent to teach him something important about the nature of nourishment, about the difference between feeding the body and feeding the soul. The next morning, instead of simply serving Nobu more food, Tenzin invited him into the kitchen to help with food preparation. If you're going to be eating so much of my cooking, Tenzin said with a gentle smile, perhaps you should learn how it's made. As they worked together, washing vegetables, grinding barley, tending the fire, something began to shift in Nobu. When Tenzin showed him how to handle each ingredient with reverence, how to cook with attention and care, how to infuse food preparation with gratitude and prayer, Nobu began to slow down. Feel the weight of this potato, Tenzin instructed. Notice how it grew in dark earth, how it stored sunlight and rain to become nourishment. Thank it for offering its life to sustain yours. For the first time in months, Nobu found himself fully present in the moment, focused on something other than his own desperate hunger. That evening, when they sat down to eat the meal they had prepared together, something remarkable happened. Nobu ate slowly, tasting each bite, appreciating the flavors they had created. For the first time since his arrival, he finished a normal portion and sat back, satisfied. I feel full, he said wonderingly. Not stuffed, but ... satisfied. Yes, Tenzin smiled. When we prepare food with mindfulness and eat with gratitude, even simple ingredients become deeply nourishing. But when we eat only to fill emptiness or distract from pain, no amount of food can satisfy us. Over the following weeks, Nobu continued working in the kitchen. As he learned to put love and attention into food preparation, his desperate hunger began to transform into genuine appreciation. He discovered that cooking for others filled the emptiness in his heart in ways that consuming food never could. More importantly, he began to understand that his real hunger had never been for food, or even for his lost wealth and status. It had been for purpose, for connection, for the sense of meaning that comes from serving something larger than ourselves. 6 months later, when spring came to the mountains, Nobu chose to remain at the monastery. He had found his calling working alongside Tenzin in the kitchen, discovering that the spiritual emptiness he had tried to fill with success, possessions, and finally food could only be satisfied through service, mindfulness, and genuine connection with others. Tenzin realized that Nobu had entered his life to teach him that hunger takes many forms, and that true nourishment comes not just from what we consume, but from how we give of ourselves. The desperate man's voracious appetite had shown the cook that the most profound satisfaction comes not from taking, but from offering our gifts in service of others' well-being. The hungry ghost had been transformed into a compassionate server, and in the process, had reminded everyone at the monastery that we are all seeking nourishment for hungers deeper than our physical needs. As you rest now, think of the people in your life who have seemed to take more than they gave, who appeared needy or demanding or never quite satisfied. Can you see that they may have been showing you something important about the nature of human hunger? About the way we all sometimes try to fill spiritual emptiness with material things. These people entered your life not to drain you, but to teach you about compassion for the ways we all struggle with deeper hungers, and to show you that true satisfaction comes not from getting more, but from finding meaningful ways to give of ourselves. Sleep peacefully, knowing that even those who seemed most demanding have served your understanding of what it means to be truly nourished, and how the deepest fulfillment comes through serving others' genuine needs with an open and generous heart. In the ancient temple of Kofukuji, where monks had tended the same garden for over 800 years, there lived a master gardener whose skill was legendary throughout Japan. Jishin had dedicated his entire life to understanding the subtle art of cultivating beauty, spending 60 years learning to work in harmony with the natural world. The temple gardens were considered among the most magnificent in the country. Every stone was placed with perfect intention, every plant chosen for its contribution to the greater harmony. Visitors would travel for days just to experience the profound peace that emanated from these carefully tended spaces. Jishin's expertise extended far beyond mere horticulture. He understood plants as living beings with their own wisdom, their own timing, their own essential nature. He could sense what each flower needed: more water, different soil, protection from wind, companionship of certain other plants. Under his care, even the most delicate specimens flourished. The master gardener took particular pride in his collection of rare orchids, housed in a special greenhouse where temperature, humidity, and light were precisely controlled. These exotic beauties were the crown jewels of his garden, each one a masterpiece of natural artistry that he had coaxed to bloom through years of patient, skilled attention. Among his prized orchids was one especially precious specimen, a rare white lotus, orchid that bloomed only once every few years. When it flowered, the entire temple community would gather to appreciate its ethereal beauty. The delicate white petals seemed to glow from within, and its subtle fragrance could transport observers into states of profound meditation. This orchid had been thriving under Jishin's care for over 15 years, each blooming more spectacular than the last. It represented everything he had learned about the delicate art of cultivation, the rewards that come from patient, skillful attention to the needs of living beings. Then, one spring morning, Jishin noticed something that filled him with alarm. The orchid's leaves were beginning to yellow, its stem showing signs of weakness. Despite his immediate attention adjusting water, light, nutrients, temperature, the plant continued to decline. For months, Jishin applied all his knowledge and experience. He consulted ancient gardening texts, sought advice from other master cultivators, tried every technique he had learned in 6 decades of practice. Nothing worked. The orchid continued its slow, inexorable decline toward death. As the plant grew weaker, Jishin found his own peace of mind disappearing. He would spend hours each day in the greenhouse, adjusting conditions, whispering encouragements to the failing orchid, trying desperately to discover what was wrong. His distress began to affect the entire garden. In his obsession with saving the one dying plant, he started neglecting other flowers that had always thrived under his care. His movements, once graceful and unhurried, became anxious and frantic. The peaceful atmosphere of the garden began to change. Other monks noticed the change in their beloved gardener. Master Jishin, the abbot gently observed one day, your attachment to this single orchid seems to be causing great suffering. Perhaps it would be wise to let it go peacefully, but I don't understand. Jishin replied, his voice tight with frustration. I've given this plant everything, perfect conditions, constant attention, the best of everything I know how to provide. Why is it dying? What am I doing wrong? The abbot considered this carefully. Perhaps the question isn't what you're doing wrong, but what this plant is trying to teach you. That evening, as Jishin sat beside the failing orchid in the quiet greenhouse, he found himself truly looking at the plant for the first time in months. Instead of seeing only its decline, he began to notice something else. Even as it was dying, there was something graceful about the way it was letting go. Its yellow leaves fell with a kind of elegant acceptance. Its posture, though weakened, maintained a quality of dignity. As he observed more closely, Jishin realized something profound. For 15 years, this orchid had given him joy, had been the object of his proudest cultivation skills, had brought beauty and wonder to countless visitors. Now, in its dying, it was offering him a different kind of teaching. You're showing me impermanence, aren't you? He whispered to the plant. You're teaching me that even the most perfectly tended things have their own timing, their own cycles beyond my control. Over the following days, instead of frantically trying to cure the orchid, Jishin began simply sitting with it, appreciating each day of its remaining life. He stopped adjusting and manipulating, stopped trying to force it back to health. Instead, he offered it his presence, his gratitude, his acceptance of whatever was unfolding. Something remarkable happened. As soon as Jishin stopped fighting the orchid's natural process, his own peace returned. And with his peace, his ability to tend the rest of the garden was restored. He noticed that several other plants had been struggling while his attention was so fixated on the dying orchid. As he returned to caring for the entire garden with his characteristic mindfulness, Jishin realized that the failing orchid had taught him something his 60 years of successful gardening never could. It had shown him the difference between skillful care and anxious attachment, between working in harmony with natural processes and trying to control outcomes. When the orchid finally died on a quiet morning in late autumn, Jishin felt not devastation but gratitude. The plant had completed its teaching. For 15 years, it had shown him the joy of successful cultivation. In its final months, it had shown him the deeper wisdom of acceptance. He carefully removed the plant from its pot and carried it to the compost area, where it would nourish future growth. As he laid it gently on the composting material, he bowed deeply. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for teaching me that true mastery isn't about keeping everything alive forever, but about honoring the natural cycles of growth, blooming, decline, and transformation." That winter, as Jishin reflected on the year's events, he understood that the orchid had entered his life not just to bring beauty to his garden, but to complete his education as a gardener. All his years of success had taught him the skills of cultivation, but only the experience of accepting loss had taught him wisdom. The following spring, when new plants began to emerge in his garden, Jishin tended them with a different quality of attention. He still provided skillful care, but without the anxiety of attachment. He appreciated each bloom while it lasted, without trying to make it last forever. His garden, reflecting this new balance between care and acceptance, became even more beautiful than before. Years later, when younger monks asked Jishin about the secret to his gardening mastery, he would tell them about the orchid that had taught him his most important lesson. Every plant that enters our garden comes as a teacher, he would say. The ones that thrive easily teach us the joy of successful nurturing, but the ones that struggle or die despite our best care, these teach us the deeper wisdom of working in harmony with forces beyond our control, of finding peace within impermanence, of understanding that true love sometimes means letting go. The dying orchid had been perfectly designed to teach Jishin what he most needed to learn at that stage of his spiritual development. It had shown him that mastery includes not just the ability to help things flourish, but the wisdom to accept when natural cycles move beyond our influence. As you rest now, think of the relationships in your life that didn't unfold as you hoped, the friendships that faded despite your efforts, the projects that failed despite your dedication, the people you couldn't help no matter how much you cared. Can you see that these experiences, like Jishin's dying orchid, may have been teaching you something essential about the balance between caring and controlling, between love and attachment? Let this understanding bring peace to your heart about the relationships and endeavors that didn't last as long as you wished. They entered your life not to frustrate you, but to teach you that true mastery includes the wisdom of acceptance, the grace of letting go, and the deeper love that honors natural cycles of growth and transformation. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that every experience of loss has also been an experience of learning. Every ending a doorway to deeper wisdom about what it means to care for others while accepting the fundamental impermanence of all things. Deep in the mountains of ancient Tibet, there lived a monk who had not spoken for over 7 years. Pemba had taken a vow of silence after achieving what he believed to be a profound state of inner peace, deciding that words were unnecessary distractions from the pure awareness he had cultivated through decades of meditation. The other monks at his remote monastery respected his choice, communicating with him through simple gestures when necessary. Pemba spent his days in seated meditation, walking meditation, and simple manual tasks, all performed in complete silence. He had found what seemed to be perfect tranquility, a mind undisturbed by the constant chatter of thoughts, a heart free from the complications of verbal interaction. Pemba took great pride in his achievement. While other monks struggled with restless minds during meditation, his awareness had become as still as a mountain lake. While others were caught up in discussions and debates about spiritual matters, he rested in direct experience beyond words. He had transcended what he saw as the primitive need for language. His daily routine was as predictable as sunrise. Morning meditation at 4 a.m., silent breakfast, work in the monastery garden, afternoon meditation, simple evening meal, and early sleep. Each day flowed into the next with peaceful regularity. Nothing disturbed his hard-won equanimity. Then, one autumn morning, this perfect silence was shattered by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. A young monk named Lobsang appeared at the monastery gates, seeking temporary shelter during a long pilgrimage. He was perhaps 25 years old, with bright, curious eyes and an energy that seemed to fill whatever space he occupied. The abbot welcomed him and assigned him a bed in the dormitory where Pemba slept. That first evening, as the monks gathered for their silent meal, Lobsang's presence was immediately noticeable. While others ate in quiet contemplation, he seemed barely able to contain his excitement about everything he was experiencing. His eyes darted around the dining hall, taking in every detail, his face animated with wonder despite the rule of silence during meals. After dinner, as Pemba was preparing for sleep, Lobsang approached him, apparently unaware of Pemba's vow of silence. He began speaking with the enthusiasm of someone eager to share his spiritual journey. Brother Lobsang said, "I'm so grateful to be here. I've been walking for months, visiting monasteries and studying with different teachers, trying to understand the deepest truths of existence. Everyone I've met has had a different perspective, and I'm fascinated by how many ways there are to approach enlightenment. Pemba gestured politely that he had taken a vow of silence, assuming this would end the conversation. But instead of being discouraged, Lobsang's eyes lit up with even greater interest. Oh, how wonderful. A vow of silence. You must have achieved such profound understanding to move beyond the need for words. I have so many questions about that. And with that, Lobsang launched into what would become a month-long monologue that would completely disrupt Pemba's peaceful routine. Every day, Lobsang would find Pemba and continue his enthusiastic exploration of spiritual questions. He would talk about everything he had learned from various teachers, the contradictions he had encountered, the mysteries that puzzled him. Even though Pemba never responded, Lobsang seemed energized by having what he imagined was a deeply wise listener. I met a master in Lhasa who said that enlightenment comes through complete surrender of the ego, Lobsang would say. But then another teacher told me that enlightenment requires strengthening the mind through meditation. How can both be true? Despite his commitment to silence, Pemba found his mind racing with responses to Lobsang's questions. Years of suppressed intellectual curiosity began stirring within him. Questions he thought he had transcended began demanding attention. And what about compassion? Lobsang continued another day. If we're supposed to help all beings achieve liberation, how can we justify spending years in solitary meditation? Isn't that selfish? This question hit Pemba particularly hard. For 7 years, he had been focused entirely on his own inner development. Had his pursuit of personal peace been a form of spiritual selfishness? Day after day, Lobsang's relentless curiosity chipped away at Pemba's carefully constructed silence. The young pilgrim would pose questions that Pemba had never considered, challenge assumptions he had never examined, point out contradictions in teachings he had accepted without question. Brother Lobsang said one evening, "You've been so patient with my endless talking. I know you've taken a vow of silence, but sometimes I wonder, is not speaking the same thing as not communicating? Because even though you never say a word, I feel like you're teaching me something important just by listening so." Completely, Pemba felt something crack open in his chest. For 7 years, he had believed that his silence made him wise, that his inner stillness was the goal of spiritual practice. But Lobsang's innocent observation forced him to recognize that his silence might actually be a form of withholding, a way of avoiding the messy, complicated work of actually engaging with others. That night, Pemba lay awake for hours, the first time his sleep had been disturbed in years. All the questions Lobsang had posed were swirling in his mind. All the contradictions the young monk had pointed out were demanding resolution. His perfect inner stillness was completely disrupted. At first, Pemba felt angry. This talkative pilgrim had destroyed years of spiritual achievement. His peaceful equanimity was shattered, his mind once again filled with the chatter he had worked so hard to transcend. But as the night wore on, something else began to emerge from his agitation. For the first time in 7 years, Pemba was thinking deeply about spiritual questions, rather than just resting in empty awareness. His mind, forced back into activity, was engaging with problems and mysteries he had avoided through his commitment to silence. The next morning, as Lobsang began his usual enthusiastic questioning, something unprecedented happened. Pemba opened his mouth and spoke. "The teachers you've met are not contradicting each other," he said, his voice rusty from years of disuse. They are describing different aspects of the same truth, like blind men describing different parts of an elephant. Lobsang's face lit up with joy. You spoke. And what you said, ... Yes. That makes so much sense. Can you tell me more? For the next several hours, Pemba found himself engaged in the most stimulating conversation he had had in decades. All the insights he had gained during his years of silence suddenly found expression. Questions that had seemed unimportant became fascinating puzzles to explore. Ideas that had been locked away in wordless awareness began flowing into articulate wisdom. As they talked, Pemba realized that his 7 years of silence had indeed been valuable. They had allowed him to develop profound inner stability and clarity. But Lobsang's relentless questioning had shown him that wisdom was meant to be shared. That insight was incomplete until it could be communicated. That spiritual understanding deepened when it was tested through interaction with others. Over the following days, Pemba found himself helping Lobsang understand the teachings he had encountered during his pilgrimage. In explaining these concepts to the eager young monk, Pemba discovered that his own understanding was deepening and clarifying in ways it never had. During his years of silent contemplation, when Lobsang finally continued his pilgrimage a week later, Pemba realized that the young monk had been sent to complete his spiritual education. 7 years of silence had taught him inner peace, but Lobsang had taught him that true wisdom must be shared to be complete. "Thank you, brother," Pemba said as they parted. "You've shown me that silence and speech are both necessary. Silence to develop understanding, speech to share it and deepen it through exchange with others." Lobsang smiled. "And you've taught me that questions are valuable not just for getting answers, but for inspiring others to discover wisdom they didn't know they possessed. Your years of silent listening prepared you to respond to my questions in ways that have transformed both of us." After Lobsang left, Pemba began teaching other monks, sharing the insights he had developed during his years of contemplative silence. He discovered that his period of not speaking had prepared him to speak with unusual clarity and depth. His silence had not been wasted. It had been preparation for a more complete form of spiritual expression. Years later, Pemba became known as a teacher who uniquely understood both the value of contemplative silence and the importance of compassionate communication. He would tell his students that Lobsang had entered his life to show him that spiritual development has 2 phases. First, we must learn to be still enough to discover truth. Then we must learn to share that truth skillfully with others. The young pilgrim seemed to disrupt my practice. Pemba would teach, but actually he completed it. He showed me that wisdom hoarded is wisdom wasted. That understanding shared becomes understanding multiplied, and that sometimes our greatest teachers come disguised as interruptions to our comfortable routines. Lobsang had been perfectly designed to challenge Pemba's assumptions about spiritual practice, to draw out wisdom that had been lying dormant during his years of silence, and to show him that enlightenment is not a personal achievement to be protected, but a gift to be shared with all beings. The question that wouldn't stop had awakened in Pemba a capacity for teaching that his years of silent meditation had prepared, but could never have revealed on its own. As you rest now, think of the people in your life who have been persistent questioners, who have challenged your comfortable assumptions, who have refused to let you retreat into safe silence when you had something valuable to offer. These people entered your life not to disturb your peace, but to help you discover that your insights are meant to be shared, that your wisdom deepens when it's tested through interaction with others. Let this understanding bring appreciation for those who have pushed you beyond your comfort zones. who have demanded that you articulate what you know, who have helped you discover capacities you didn't know you possessed. Sleep peacefully, knowing that even the most disruptive questioners in your life have served your growth, drawing out gifts that were waiting to be shared with the world. High in the Himalayan peaks, where the air grows thin and the silence seems to stretch into eternity, stood a temple that had welcomed seekers for over 1,000 years. The Temple of Lasting Peace was renowned throughout Tibet for the profound tranquility that pervaded every corner of its ancient halls. The temple's Abbot Rinpoche Tenzin was himself a man of extraordinary serenity. For 40 years, he had maintained the same gentle routine: morning prayers at dawn, quiet study of sacred texts, afternoon meditation, evening teachings for the handful of monks who lived at this remote altitude. His presence radiated such deep calm that visitors often felt their own anxieties dissolve simply by sitting in the same room with him. The temple attracted a particular type of seeker, those who had grown weary of the world's noise and complexity, who sought the kind of profound stillness that could only be found in such remote and peaceful serenity. Most visitors would stay for a few weeks or months, absorbing the temple's tranquil atmosphere before returning to their lives below, carrying with them a taste of genuine inner peace. The rhythm of the temple was as predictable as the movement of the seasons. Each day flowed into the next with harmonious regularity. Meals were eaten in contemplative silence, work was done with mindful attention, and evenings were spent in quiet reflection or gentle conversation about spiritual matters. Then, one crisp autumn day, this 1,000-year-old pattern was dramatically disrupted. A young man arrived at the temple gates, clearly exhausted from the difficult climb but somehow still radiating restless energy. He introduced himself as Jamyang, a scholar from the university in Dharamshala who had come seeking authentic spiritual experience for research he was conducting on comparative meditation practices. From the moment Jamyang entered the temple, his presence created ripples in the established calm, while others moved through their activities with unhurried grace. He seemed constantly in motion, taking notes, asking questions, analyzing everything he observed. His mind appeared to be in perpetual overdrive, processing, categorizing, and intellectualizing every aspect of monastic life. During meals, while others ate in peaceful silence, Jamyang would fidget, glancing around as if searching for something more interesting to occupy his attention. During meditation sessions, his restlessness was palpable. He would shift positions frequently, check his watch, and seem generally uncomfortable with the simple practice of sitting still. Most disturbing to the temple's residents was Jamyang's constant questioning. He would approach Rinpoche Tenzin after teachings with elaborate intellectual inquiries. How do you reconcile the doctrine of non-self with the concept of rebirth? Or what's the philosophical basis for claiming that meditation leads to liberation when contemporary neuroscience suggests consciousness is merely brain activity? While other students accepted the abbot's gentle teachings with respectful silence, Jamyang would argue, debate, and demand logical proofs for spiritual assertions. His questions seemed designed not to deepen understanding, but to demonstrate his own intellectual sophistication. After 2 weeks of this disruption, several of the resident monks approached Rinpoche Tenzin privately. "Venerable teacher," one said respectfully, "this young scholar's presence is disturbing our practice. His restlessness is contagious. His constant questioning undermines the simple faith that allows spiritual growth. Perhaps it would be better if he continued his research elsewhere." Rinpoche Tenzin listened to their concerns with his characteristic patience, but to their surprise, he shook his head gently. Jamyang will stay as long as he needs to. He has been sent to teach us something important. Teach us? Another monk asked, incredulous. But he can't even sit still for a 10-minute meditation. What could he possibly teach experienced practitioners like ourselves? That, said the abbot with a mysterious smile, is exactly what we need to discover. Over the following days, Rinpoche Tenzin began paying closer attention to Jamyang's behavior, observing the young scholar with the same mindful awareness he brought to his meditation practice. What he noticed was both troubling and illuminating. Jamyang's intellectual questioning wasn't really seeking answers, it was avoiding experience. His constant note-taking and analysis were ways of staying in his head rather than opening his heart. His restlessness during meditation wasn't just physical discomfort, it was profound. Anxiety about encountering the stillness within himself. Most revealing was what happened during the temple's daily period of noble silence. 2 hours each afternoon when even conversation was suspended, while others used this time for deep contemplation. Jamyang would become visibly agitated, sometimes even leaving the temple grounds to walk frantically in the surrounding mountains. One afternoon, Rinpoche Tenzin followed Jamyang during one of these restless mountain walks. He found the young scholar sitting on a rocky outcrop, staring at the vast Himalayan landscape with an expression of profound confusion and pain. The silence terrifies you, doesn't it? The abbot said gently, settling beside him on the rocks. Jamyang startled, then laughed bitterly. Is it that obvious? All my life, I've prided myself on my analytical mind, my ability to understand complex philosophical concepts. But here, when I try to just be quiet, all I encounter is chaos. My mind won't stop racing. I can't seem to access the peace that everyone else finds so easily. And what do you find in racing thoughts? Jamyang was quiet for a long moment. Fear, mostly. Fear that if I stop thinking, stop analyzing, stop proving how smart I am, there won't be anything left. That underneath all my intellectual accomplishments, I'm just ... empty. Rinpoche Tenzin nodded with deep understanding. You've spent so many years building an identity around your thinking mind that you're afraid to discover who you are beyond thought. Your constant questioning isn't really seeking truth, it's avoiding the terrifying possibility of encountering silence. Over the following weeks, something remarkable began to happen. Instead of trying to force Jamyang to conform to the temple's peaceful routine, Rinpoche Tenzin began working with the young scholar's restlessness as a doorway rather than an obstacle. Your anxiety about silence is itself a form of meditation object, the abbot explained. Instead of fighting your restless thoughts, can you observe them with curiosity? Instead of judging your inability to be still, can you study it with the same intellectual rigor you bring to philosophical questions? This approach intrigued Jamyang. For the first time, his analytical mind became an ally rather than an obstacle in spiritual practice. He began keeping detailed notes, not about external observations, but about the patterns of his own mental activity. He studied his resistance to silence with the same intensity he had once devoted to academic research. Gradually, Jamyang's relationship with stillness began to shift, as he learned to observe his restlessness without fighting it. The very act of observation began to create space around his thoughts. His racing mind slowly began to settle, not through forced suppression, but through patient, curious attention. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden, but day by day, Jamyang became more comfortable with brief moments of silence. His questions during teachings became less defensive and more genuinely curious. His meditation periods grew longer as his fear of inner emptiness was replaced by growing familiarity with the spacious awareness that exists beyond thought. Most importantly, Jamyang's presence began to affect the other monks in unexpected ways. His sincere struggle with basic meditation practices reminded them not to take their own spiritual accomplishments for granted. His intellectual approach to understanding mind patterns gave them new tools for examining their own mental habits. Jamyang has taught us something crucial, Rinpoche Tenzin told his monks one evening. We had begun to assume that spiritual peace comes easily to everyone, that those who struggle with meditation are somehow deficient. But watching his courageous engagement with his own mental chaos has reminded us that true peace is not the absence of disturbance, but the ability to remain centered within disturbance. 6 months later, when Jamyang finally prepared to leave the temple, he was a profoundly different person. His restless energy had been transformed into dynamic mindfulness. His intellectual gifts had been integrated with genuine contemplative insight. Most importantly, he had learned that spiritual development doesn't require abandoning the mind, but rather bringing awareness to mental activity. You came here to study meditation practices, Rinpoche Tenzin said as they parted. But you ended up teaching us that there are as many paths to awakening as there are types of minds seeking it. Your struggle with our traditional approaches forced us to develop more skillful ways of working with different temperaments and learning styles. Had entered the peaceful temple not to absorb its tranquility, but to challenge its assumptions about how spiritual growth occurs. His restlessness had been perfectly designed to show both himself and the resident monks that true peace must be spacious enough to include all kinds of minds, all varieties of spiritual approach. The restless scholar had taught them that sometimes the most valuable spiritual lessons come not from those who embody the qualities we admire, but from those who struggle authentically with the very challenges we ourselves have faced, but perhaps forgotten. As you rest now, think of the people in your life who have seemed unable to appreciate the peace or wisdom you value, who have been restless in situations where you found tranquility, who have questioned approaches that you found helpful. Can you see that they may have been showing you something important about the diversity of human temperaments and spiritual needs? These people entered your life not to disturb your peace, but to expand your understanding of what peace can look like, to help you develop more inclusive and compassionate ways of supporting others' growth, and to remind you that true wisdom must be flexible enough to meet people where they are rather than where we think they should be. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that every person who has challenged your comfortable assumptions about how life should be lived has served your growth, teaching you that there are as many ways to find fulfillment as there are individuals seeking it, and that sometimes our greatest teachers come disguised as those who seem most different from ourselves. In a small monastery nestled in the misty mountains of ancient China, Master Wu had spent his final years sharing the profound wisdom he had accumulated over 7 decades of devoted practice. At 93, he was renowned throughout the region not only for his spiritual insights, but for his extraordinary ability to see the hidden potential in every person who crossed his path. The monastery had grown around Master Wu's presence, attracting sincere students who came to study the way under his gentle but penetrating guidance. His closest disciples had been with him for many years, each hoping to be chosen as his successor when the time came for him to pass on the lineage of teachings he had received from his own master decades earlier. Among his senior students, 3 stood out as most likely inheritors of his spiritual legacy. There was Liang, a scholarly monk who had mastered the classical texts and could discourse eloquently on the subtlest points of philosophy. There was Chen, whose meditation practice was so refined that he could sit in absorbed silence for days at a time. And there was Tao, whose compassion was legendary. He would spend countless hours caring for sick villagers and teaching children in the valley below. Each of these disciples had devoted 20 years or more to studying with Master Wu, and each possessed qualities that clearly qualified them for leadership. The entire monastic community expected that one of these three would be chosen to carry forward the Master's teachings when he was no longer able to do so. Then, in the final months of his life, Master Wu's health began to decline rapidly. As he grew weaker, the question of succession became urgent. Who would he choose to receive the final transmission of his understanding? Who would become the next abbot of this beloved spiritual community? During this time, a most unexpected figure appeared at the monastery. Her name was Ming, and she was a middle-aged woman from a nearby village who had never shown any interest in formal spiritual study. She worked as a seamstress, was known for her quick temper, and had a reputation for speaking her mind without much regard for social conventions. Ming came to the monastery not seeking teachings, but to bring her elderly mother for Master Wu's blessing before the old woman died. She had heard that the Master was himself very ill, but hoped he might still be well enough to offer her mother some comfort in her final days. When Ming arrived, carrying her frail mother in a simple cart she had constructed herself, the monks were initially reluctant to disturb their dying teacher. But Master Wu, upon hearing of the visitors, insisted on receiving them immediately. The meeting between the dying master and the two women was brief but profound. Master Wu spent nearly an hour with Ming's mother, holding her hand and speaking quietly about the nature of letting go, about the continuous flow of life even through the apparent barrier of death. The old woman's face, which had been tight with fear, gradually relaxed into peaceful acceptance. But what surprised everyone was Master Wu's interaction with Ming herself. While her mother rested, he engaged the village seamstress in conversation, asking about her work, her family, her understanding of life's difficulties and joys. Ming, who had expected to feel intimidated in the presence of such a renowned spiritual teacher, found herself speaking with unusual openness about her struggles, her doubts, her simple approach to daily challenges. "I don't know anything about enlightenment or meditation, Master," she said honestly. "I just try to get through each day without causing too much harm and help where I can. My mother always said the best teaching is in how you treat the person right in front of you, Master." Wu's eyes brightened at these words, and he asked Ming to stay at the monastery for a few days while her mother received care, though she protested that she was not a suitable guest for such a holy place. Something in the old master's manner convinced her to accept. Over the following days, the monastery community observed something extraordinary. While the senior disciples continued their practices with reverent solemnity, mindful of their master's approaching death, Ming moved through the monastery with natural ease. She helped in the kitchen without being asked, mended torn robes without expecting recognition, and sat with dying Master Wu during the long afternoon hours, talking to him as naturally as she might chat with a neighbor. Most remarkably, in Ming's presence, Master Wu seemed more alert and engaged than he had been in months. Their conversations, overheard by passing monks, were not about profound philosophical matters but about simple, human concerns, the changing seasons, the challenges of caring for aging parents, the small kindnesses that make life meaningful. "This woman treats our revered master like an ordinary person," some disciples murmured disapprovingly. She shows no special reverence for his spiritual attainments. But others noticed something different. Ming's complete lack of spiritual pretension seemed to allow Master Wu to relax in ways he couldn't with his formal students. With her, he didn't need to be a wise teacher. He could simply be an old man facing death with whatever grace he could muster. When Master Wu's condition worsened further, and it became clear he had only days remaining, the community gathered to hear his final teachings and learn of his chosen successor. The senior disciples arranged themselves close to his bedside, each hoping to receive the formal transmission that would mark them as the next spiritual leader. But when Master Wu finally spoke, his words surprised everyone. "My dear students," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, "you have all studied faithfully and practiced diligently. Each of you has developed remarkable spiritual qualities that will serve you well on your continuing journey. But leadership of this community requires something more than personal spiritual achievement." He paused, gathering strength for his final teaching. It requires the ability to see the Buddha nature in everyone, regardless of their background or apparent qualifications. It requires the wisdom to respond to whatever arises with practical compassion rather than theoretical knowledge. Most importantly, it requires the humility to remain a genuine human being while serving others' spiritual needs. The room was completely silent as Master Wu continued. "For these reasons, I am asking Ming to become your next teacher." The shock in the room was palpable. Ming herself looked as stunned as the assembled monks. "Master, that's impossible," she protested. "I don't know anything about Buddhism. I can't even read the sacred texts." "Exactly," Master Wu smiled weakly. "You won't be tempted to hide behind scholarship when direct response is needed. You won't retreat into meditation when active compassion is called for. You won't let spiritual concepts become more important than the human beings in front of you." He turned to his assembled disciples. "Ming has shown in just a few days what some of you have struggled to learn in 20 years, that enlightenment is not a special state to be achieved, but the natural expression of treating each moment and each person as sacred. She has cared for her difficult mother without thinking it was spiritual practice. She has helped in our kitchen without seeking merit. She has sat with a dying old man without trying to gain anything from the encounter." Over the following days, as Master Wu's final teaching became reality, something remarkable happened. The initial shock and resistance from the formal students gradually gave way to recognition. As they watched, Ming naturally step into caring for their community's practical needs, while the master completed his transition from life. They began to see qualities in her they had overlooked. Her quick temper, they realized, was actually swift responsiveness to situations that required action. Her lack of reverence for spiritual formalities allowed her to focus completely on people's actual needs. Her simple, direct way of speaking cut through complicated problems to essential solutions. Most importantly, Ming's complete lack of pretension about her spiritual understanding created space for others to be genuine about their own struggles and questions. Under her guidance, the monastery atmosphere shifted from one of formal pursuit of enlightenment to one of authentic mutual support in the messy, beautiful process of being human. When Master Wu died peacefully 3 days later, Ming was holding one of his hands, while Liang, Chen, and Tao held the other. In that moment, the former rivals understood that their master's final teaching had been perfect. He had shown them that spiritual authority comes not from accumulated knowledge or advanced meditative states, but from the capacity to remain completely present and responsive to whatever life presents. Years later, under Ming's guidance, The monastery became known not for producing great scholars or advanced meditators, but for the quality of genuine human kindness that characterized everyone who studied there. Visitors would often comment that they had never encountered such authentic spiritual community, not because the practices were sophisticated, but because everyone seemed committed to treating each person as worthy of complete attention and care. Ming had entered Master Wu's life in his final months not to learn spiritual teachings, but to embody them in her naturally compassionate response to her mother's needs and his own approaching death. She had been exactly the teacher the master needed at the end of his life. Someone who could help him die not as a revered spiritual figure, but as a beloved human being. And she had been exactly the successor the community needed, someone who could help them remember that all spiritual practice is ultimately about learning to love more fully, more practically, more immediately in response to whatever arises. As you rest now, think of the people who have entered your life without impressive credentials or obvious qualifications, but who have somehow brought out the best in you through their simple, authentic presence. Consider those who have cared for you not because it was their spiritual practice, but simply because care was what the situation called for. These people entered your life to show you that wisdom is not something we acquire, but something we express through our willingness to respond wholeheartedly to the needs right in front of us. They came to teach you that the most profound spiritual teachings are often embodied by those who would never think to call themselves teachers. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that every person who has crossed your path has been perfectly designed to teach you something essential about what it means to be fully human, fully present, fully available to the sacred opportunity of this very moment. In the great mystery of human connection, no encounter has ever been accidental, and every relationship has served your awakening to the profound truth that we are all teachers and students for each other on this shared journey of learning to love. As our journey through these 10 stories draws to a close, let yourself rest deeply in the understanding that has been growing within you throughout this night. Each tale we've shared has illuminated a facet of the same profound truth that every person who has ever entered your life has done so as part of a perfect, sacred design that serves your highest growth and awakening. From the merchant who taught Master Chen that betrayal can be a doorway to wisdom, to Ming who showed Master Wu that enlightenment is found in simple, authentic presence, each story has revealed how our greatest teachers often come disguised in unexpected forms. The people who have challenged us, supported us, frustrated us, inspired us, and even broken our hearts have all been perfectly placed in our path to offer exactly the lessons we needed to receive. This understanding transforms everything. The difficult boss becomes a teacher of patience and inner strength. The loyal friend becomes a mirror reflecting our capacity for love. The family member who pushes our buttons becomes a master class in unconditional compassion. The stranger who offers unexpected kindness becomes a reminder of the basic goodness that flows through all beings. Even those who have caused us the deepest pain, they too have served our awakening. Like Koji, the blacksmith, who taught young Tenzo that real compassion is a choice we make regardless of how we're treated. Our most challenging relationships have forged within us capacities for forgiveness, resilience, and wisdom that gentler encounters could never have developed. In the Buddhist understanding, we are all interconnected in ways that the ordinary mind cannot fully comprehend. Each person you meet is both a teacher offering you exactly what you need to learn in this moment, and a student to whom you're offering exactly what they need to receive. This cosmic dance of mutual awakening has been unfolding since the beginning of time, and your life is a unique thread in this vast, beautiful tapestry of connection and growth. As you prepare to drift into sleep, let this understanding settle into every cell of your being. Feel gratitude for every person who has ever touched your life, those who stayed and those who left, those who supported and those who challenged, those who loved you and those who taught you to love yourself. Each encounter has been a gift, each relationship a teaching, each human connection a sacred opportunity for mutual awakening. From the mountain monasteries where ancient monks first understood these truths, to this very moment as you rest in your bed, the same eternal wisdom continues to unfold. No one enters your life by chance. No meeting is ever accidental. No relationship is ever meaningless. You are held always in the perfect unfolding of a love so vast and intelligent that it uses every encounter, every challenge, every moment of connection to guide you home to your own true nature. Rest now in this profound truth, knowing that tomorrow will bring new teachers, new opportunities for growth, new chances to both learn and serve in the great work of awakening. Let your breath become as gentle as mountain mist, your body as still as an ancient temple at dawn. Feel yourself sinking deeper and deeper into the peaceful understanding that every person you have ever met has been exactly who you needed them to be, arriving exactly when you needed their teaching most. Sleep deeply now, beloved traveler on the path of awakening. Sleep in the knowledge that you are never alone, never lost, never without the perfect teachers for your journey. In this vast web of sacred connection that holds all beings, you are forever supported, forever guided, forever loved. And as you rest, may your dreams be filled with gratitude for the mystery of human relationship, for the perfect imperfection of everyone who has shared this path with you, and for the endless opportunities that await you to both learn and teach through the simple, sacred act of meeting each person with an open heart. The Buddha taught that in our vast interconnectedness, every being we encounter is our mother, our teacher, our child, our student. Tonight, as sleep embraces you like the most gentle teacher of all, rest in the profound peace of knowing that no one, absolutely no one, enters your life by chance.